Bard on the Plains podcast with Mike McPeak. It's about stories, mine and yours.
It's hard to watch your dream die. I was raised on a farm in South Dakota near Willow Lake. I was the youngest of 5 children, with the rest of them being 14 to 21 years older than I am. So I grew up as an only child that happened to have siblings. My parents were in their mid-40s and starting to slow down, so they weren't as active as they used to be. There was no neighborhood kids nearby, so I would have to entertain myself, and the farm became my playground. I would play out in the tree groves and make adventures and find new animals and plants and just explore out there. Or out in one of the pastures, we had an old windmill that would become an anti-aircraft gun as I shot down enemy planes. Or I would play in the tall weeds around the barn and in the feedlot, making trails and becoming a jungle explorer. But growing up, the farm was a big part of my life. And there was my dad. He was a farmer, but he was more than that. He didn't just stick seeds in the ground and harvest them to make money. He cared for the land. That came from the way that he grew up. He was born in 1915 and grew up during the Depression. Not only was there hard economic times going on, but there was also a drought. So the family lost their land that had been my Grandpa McPeak's that he homesteaded in 1883 and had to move to a little house by Dry Lake. There wasn't a lot of work for Dad to do, so he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps. That was a program that the government started to get people employed and help make improvements in the country. So he went out to the Black Hills and helped build roads and make improvements. He helped wire Wind Cave National Park and put steps in so that it would be easier for visitors to go through and see it. Eventually, he came home and started farming with his brother. He met my mom, who had 2 children from a previous marriage. They dated, got married, rented some land, and started farming on his own. They saved up money, took out loans, bought some more lands that eventually grew to be 1,000 acres. Having grown up during the 30s, he saw that what erosion could do to the land. He would always try to implement the best farming practices of the day, so he would do contour farming, which is farming or plowing around the hill rather than up and down it, so that the soil wouldn't wash away so easily. He was also very adamant about weed control. He would use chemicals if he needed, but he also tried to control it through crop rotation and tillage methods. He was on the state, county, and township weed boards, and his big thing was trying to control leafy spurge, one of South Dakota's most noxious weeds. It wouldn't be unusual for us to be driving down the highway or a road in the springtime, and all of a sudden his arm would go out and his finger would point, and we knew exactly what he was talking about. He saw some leafy spurge out there. I thought the guy could actually smell the stuff. He didn't have to see it. And I think one of the saddest times I ever saw was my dad when we went out to the Black Hills, and we were driving around, and somehow we ended up behind Mount Rushmore. We drove behind, and there was this giant field of leafy spurge. And he was just so disappointed to see one of our national treasures had one of South Dakota's most noxious weeds growing in it. He's also very passionate about tree planting. Having grown up in the 30s with the drought going on, he saw what wind erosion could do to the land. South Dakota does not natively have a lot of trees, and when the wind starts whipping across the plains, it's very easy to pick up dirt and topsoil and deposit it in the rivers and streams, where eventually it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. So one of the programs that President Roosevelt instituted was tree planting, and Dad took that very seriously all his life. I remember one year we planted 200 trees. I dig the hole, Dad would plant it. I would carry a bucket of water for the plant. And I got so sick and tired, him and I got into an argument about it. But now looking back, I see that he was right, because there's getting to be fewer trees in this country because the price of land keeps going up and you need to farm more to make it pay. Farmers have started farming from fence row to fence row to try and make a profit, so they have to rip out trees, and it feels like we've taken a step back with soil conservation practices. Dad didn't just teach me about farming. He also gave me a sense of community and what it means to belong to a group of people. Him and Mom both volunteered with different organizations. Mom spent a lot of time with the American Cancer Society because she was a cancer survivor. Dad worked with the National Farmers Organization, or the NFO. This was a group of people that tried to improve the family farm through collective bargaining to raise prices. These people would farm all day and then they would go to these meetings at night. Sometimes they referred to themselves as the Night Fighters Organization because some of these meetings wouldn't get over until late. But I know there's many times that that while we were there having these meetings, I was just a kid, so I was wandering around and entertaining myself and looking for things to do. And then there was always a long car ride home, and I got used to falling asleep with my head on Mom's shoulder. It's kind of a bad habit I picked up because now I still tend to get sleepy when I drive, which really scares the passengers in my car. But this was a commitment they were both willing to make to try and improve not only their lives, but the lives of others around them, and make this a better place to live. So I grew up living on a farm that Dad loved as much as Mom and us kids. And he taught us lessons about hard work, because there was always work to do. You could never get away from it on the farm. There was picking rocks. Nobody liked doing that job, but we knew it had to be done. You'd go out in the field, and it was usually hot and dusty, and pick up rocks off the ground and put them on the flatbed, take them over to the corner of the field, and put them on a pile, and it seemed like there was some mighty big rock piles. But we knew it had to be done because if you didn't, the equipment would get wrecked running over the rocks, and it would cost money and time and you just didn't have that much of that on the farm to begin with. So he tried to protect what you had. Same way with making hay. We would push hay together in big piles, and Dad was very meticulous about how he built them. He would pack it down and make sure there was no air pockets and that they were nice and round. That way the water would run off. Otherwise, your hay would rot and it would be of no use to you again. You'd be wasting a valuable resource. So we learned lessons about never giving up and just sticking with the job to get it done. But I was a typical teenager. I didn't want to work all the time. I wanted to go to town and have some fun and be with my friends and do different things, but Dad thought I should stay home and help him with the farm. We got into a bunch of arguments over that, and eventually we kind of reached a compromise and got things figured out, but I think Dad would have preferred if I would stay home and help him more often. In spite of this, my passion for farming was growing. I was proud to be one of the 4% that fed this country and allowed other peoples to pursue jobs that would grow the economy and make this nation stronger. In high school, I joined the Future Farmers of America, the FFA, the Blue and Gold. This is an organization that I was proud to be part of. It taught me lessons I carry with me today about leadership and responsibility and doing the right things. One of the first things you do when you join the FFA is you learn the FFA Creed. It's about 4 paragraphs long, but the first is the paragraph that has always stuck with me throughout the years. I believe in the future of agriculture, with a faith born not of words but of deeds, achievements won by past and present generations of agriculture in the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. I would listen to this and I would think of my grandpa Ben McPeak moving here from Illinois and homesteading in Clark County, about how one winter the storms was so bad he had to bring his horse into the house to save it because he didn't have a barn at the time and the horse was too valuable to lose. Or I would think about all the hard work that my brothers and sisters have done on the farm, and I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of some proud legacy. But most of all, I was just a farming nerd. I loved agriculture. My best friend David and I, we were the ag kids in our class. We were the ones that were going to farm for the rest of our lives. We just knew it. We would be in the class, and the teacher would hand out the test, and sometimes he would put bonus questions on. So we'd end up with 104% on the test. We just knew it. We knew how to do this stuff, and we loved it. Dad passed away at the end of my junior year. Mom suspected there might be something wrong, so she suggested I spend some time with him and, kind of get to know each other a little bit and kind of mend some fences. But, yeah, even with all that, when the time came, it was still a shock when he died. It was just Mom and me on the farm. My siblings had all moved away, gotten jobs, and had kids, and really weren't interested in coming back to the farm. Dad had gotten most of the crops planted before he died. Neighbors came over and helped finish planting the rest. I finished my senior year. I had a teacher that would give me some motivational speeches, or as we called them, attitude realignment sessions. He's one of those people that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Just because of the way he treated you, he would take you into his office once in a while. This was a 6'7" Norwegian who had a very imposing manner, but he was still firm and gentle. He'd say, Michael, you need to go home. Your mother needs you. You have a farm to run. And he kind of reminded me of my responsibilities and things I needed to do. The next year, we rented out the crop ground, and we kept the hayland and the pasture, the cows and the sheep, and we were ready to continue farming. Dad hadn't taught me everything I needed to know about farming, so I decided to go to a Votech in Watertown to learn more. They had an ag production course that would help me fill in some of my gaps and teach me more about modern techniques that we would need to run the farm better. I got my vocational education and came back to take over the farm. While I was going to school, I met my wife. A month after I graduated, we got married. I took the city girl to the farm that I grew up on. I took back some of the crop land and we started to farm. Along with having sheep and cattle, I fixed up some of the buildings and started to make improvements. We were making a living, but we weren't getting rich. We didn't have much money for things, but we made do. The first house we lived in was an old farmhouse across the road from Mom's. We cut down trees for the wood-burning stove and snuggled at night to keep warm. Then a couple years later, we moved to a trailer house behind Mom's. We had lots of secondhand stuff, but we were young and in love, and I was doing what I loved. 6 years after we were married, we had our first son, and then 2 years later, we had our second. Prices weren't good, but I was still in love with the idea of farming, but was beginning to realize that it was a lot of work. To be honest, I wasn't the best farmer. I still loved the idea of farming, but the work and responsibility of taking care of a farm and my wife and kids and my mom was starting to wear at me. Between rising costs, low prices, and not always the best yields, it was getting harder to make things work, and my passion was starting to die. Finally, Mom and I got to talking and decided that this really wasn't working out. So we decided to get out of the grain farming. We kept the pasture and the hay, the sheep and the cows. I got a job working in a potato chip factory near Clark. I would work 8 hours a day. In the summertime, I would come home and make hay until the sun set. In the wintertime, I'd come home and do the chores and feed the cows. About a month after I started this job, Deb and I found out that we were going to have a third child. About 8 months later, we had a daughter. And with Deb pregnant, we decided to get rid of the sheep because she was the one that took care of them. But we kept the cows and continued on farming. I would work at the plant and come home and make hay and do chores, and everything continued like this until the winter of 96 and 97. It started snowing in November, and it never seemed to quit. I would call the guy to move the hay home, but he would only do it on the weekends because he wanted me there to help him. And every weekend there was a snowstorm. We just couldn't get it moved home. And the snow kept getting deeper and deeper. And it was to the point where his machine couldn't haul it home. And I just said, forget it. I'll just drive out there with the tractor and haul the hay home to the cows because it wasn't that far. And we weren't going to be able to get the hay moved anyway. So I kept doing that. But the snow kept piling up and getting deeper. I'd work 8 hours at the plant, get home about 4, and then go out to do the chores. First, I'd have to move snow before I could even get to the hay to haul it to the cows. And as it got deeper, it was getting harder to haul the hay home. Instead of being able to go a few hundred yards, I would have to go a mile around just to bring the hay home without having to move the least amount of snow. I would get stuck quite often. There was a few times I got stuck so bad I'd have to have a payloader come out to dig me out. I was buried that bad. Finally, about February, I went in the house. Our tractor had a cab on it but didn't have any heat. My feet were frozen. They were starting to burn. I looked at Mom and said, do we really want to do this anymore? And she said no. But at that point, we were pretty much committed. We couldn't sell the cows because there was so much snow in the yard we couldn't get a truck in to haul them home. So we muddled through spring and into summer. And in September, we sold the cows, we paid off all the loans, and we were completely debt-free. At that point, most people may have started to try and regroup and start over again. But my passion had died by then. And there we were, officially done farming. I had brought our long agrarian roots to an end. and for that I felt a little guilty. But I realized at heart I was really a 9 to 5 person. I kind of liked having the weekends free and not having to be home every night to feed the cows or make arrangements if we ever wanted to go on vacation. There was a certain amount of freedom, and I enjoyed that. Mom hung on to the land, and she continued to live there until 2006 when she moved to town. We lived on the farm until 1999 when I moved to town to be closer to my work. But we hung on to the land. A few years before Mom passed away, we got everything set up in the trust so that when she passed away in March of 2011, the land went to us kids. We still have the legacy that we grew up with, and we are still very attached to it. And we maintain the farm the way that Dad did. We have renters that agree with our philosophy and understand the way we want the land worked. So even though we're not farming anymore, we're still keeping Dad's vision of agriculture and community alive. And we have a legacy that we can pass down to our children as well. It's hard to watch one's dreams die, but sometimes it's for the best.
If you have a story you'd like to tell, contact Mike on Twitter @BardOnThePlains or by email at bardontheplains@gmail.com. For more information about the stories in this podcast, visit bardontheplains.com.